Hello and welcome back to the Premier Injuries channel. This is the last Premier Injuries podcast of 2021. So next time you see us all together, it will be 2022. And we hope that you've had a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And also, a little gift to us from you guys would be if you could hit that subscribe button, if you could like and comment below, because, all year we've been here for you every Thursday, and just hopefully you can return us the favor just a little bit, because we love your interaction. We love chatting to you and also hearing your comments and interaction as well. But today we're going to talk about a very important Ben, what's happening with you?
I'm plugging in my laptop. It wasn't plugged in. What an end to the year that was. Absolute schoolboy error. But I'm back up to. I'm getting powered up. So
shall I redo the intro, or shall we just?
Nah, we'll keep
it in, keep it rolling, keep the show going.
Let's go.
Today we're talking about fatigue. I guess we're a little bit fatigued as well, because we have been working flat out all year, and it's quite interesting. We're going to play clips from Pep and Klopp because they've had some interesting talking points this week. Ben, first and foremost, though, I mean, we've talked off air. We'll talk on air about this. Do you kind of have problems with this attitude from managers? They're talking almost like it's a surprise that they have such a hectic schedule when everybody's got the same level playing field. If anything, Pep and Klopp have much bigger squads than a lot of the smaller teams, and a lot of other teams are just kind of carrying on with it. Or do you think that they've got a legitimate position that the players' health has been put at risk?
I mean, those managers will argue that they've been involved in European competition, and a large proportion of their players as well were involved in international tournaments in the summer, most of them going fairly deep into those tournaments, and therefore their turnaround with players in rest is, they haven't really had that opportunity to recharge their batteries. But what really sort of gets me going, I suppose, it's the same old conversations at the same time of year. And as you alluded to, nothing's new. We know that this fixture schedule is planned well in advance. They know that they will be playing ultimately games every sort of 2.5 to 3 days. So either do something about it, plan and prepare a little bit better, or shut up and get on with it. Because, like I say, unless you're prepared or willing to do something about it, then, this constant sort of, I remember doing a piece on Pep. We must be talking 3 years ago now. This Christmas schedule, it's got to stop. It's got to stop. You are killing my players, was the words he used. You are killing my players. Here we are, 3 years down the line, talking about the same old stuff. We've had advances in technology. We've had greater sums of money pumped into the game, bigger squads, better management, even fewer fixtures than yesteryear, better pitches. And yet, we're still seeing massive burden on clubs in terms of injury incidents, and nothing really seems to change. So, we've heard from Jordan Henderson this week talking about player welfare, and I'm still not sure what player welfare means and what these players are actually prepared to do for it, because opening their mouths and talking about it is one thing, but having the desire and the need and the want to be able to take it to the next level and actually say to the league and stand up to maybe, the FA, the Premier League, the broadcasters, and say, right, well, actually, we're not prepared to do this anymore. This is what I'm willing to sacrifice to ensure that things change.
I mean, Raj, I think that's quite a controversial opinion in the footballing community, because a lot of fans kind of seem to reflect this, and this is maybe why the winter break that has been brought to the Premier League was brought about. But do you agree with Ben on this?
I do. I mean, it's a lot of words, no action, right? So anyone can say anything at any time, but unless you take actual action and are willing to back it up and sacrifice, nothing will change, especially when there's this much money involved. And like Ben was saying, 3 years on now with Pep, same conversation, same talking points, same articles every single year at this time, right? Once we get through this, does anyone bring it back up? Is there ever any action or, no, right back to business. So, if you really want to change something, there's got to be action to back it up. And we haven't seen that.
We're going to talk about the science in a second, but I do think we should talk about this because I find it quite interesting that I think both of you would agree that the points that they're saying are almost correct in a sense, that the science would back up that this schedule is not good for players. I mean, do you think that maybe it's an indication that the managers and the players are now coming out that the league is almost too powerful, that the players do not have a choice? We talked about this last week with COVID, how we said that the reality is it's all about the money. I mean, really, is this more of a reflection of the unfairness of the situation here? I mean, Raj, is it a little bit different in America? Would you be seeing players coming out talking about welfare issues and then the league just kind of passing it by?
I think it depends on the league. I think in general, even in America, the league certainly holds, the owners in the league hold the major balance of power, maybe less so in the NBA because it has become more of an individual and star-driven league. And that's just due to the nature of, one, that they have 12 people on their roster, so every person matters a lot more. Secondly, since the 80s, they've been marketing individuals, so a lot of attention has gone towards developing these stars and their platforms, so they might have more say. But in general, it still comes down to league protocols. For example, right now in the NBA, you have numerous teams dealing with 6, 7, 8 players out with COVID protocols, and teams still have to play. And so you're not seeing any really pushback on that either, maybe behind the scenes, but not in public at least.
The kind of rhetoric is around the Premier League, but also probably European football as a whole, is that players are paid too much, that they've got too much power, that these super agents do. But surely this is almost an indicator, Ben, that this is a rare opportunity, a rare occurrence where actually the players do not have the power, they do not have the say over their situations. I mean, surely in your mind, this must be a good thing. Yes, Klopp and Pep at the end of the season is kind of all forgotten about and not discussed, but they're using their platform for a good cause. Like, it's not something that you disagree with. Might be a bit annoying, they might not follow it up, but it's a bit like, maybe a politician kind of talking about a subject every year around the same time of year. What they're saying is correct, but maybe you're just a bit angry that they're not following up. Is that the only problem that you have?
I mean, I disagree somewhat in what you may be suggesting there, that players don't have any power, because to me, the players have all the power. The fans and the players should have the power, because the two are so entwined that if you haven't got them, you haven't got the sport, you haven't got a game. And what we've seen, well, we haven't seen a great deal in actual fact. Players need to act if they believe strongly enough. Players are commodities now, and for me, you see the emergence of player power, where Paul Pogba for me is a prime example of somebody who thinks he's above and beyond the status, the heritage, the tradition of the club. I can do what I want when I want, and if you don't like it, I'm off. Do you know what? If players maybe hold clubs accountable, hold clubs to ransom to an extent, they force their owners and their managers to take that up the line, because without the players, there isn't a product. And without the product, there isn't a broadcast. And without broadcast, there's no money. So, look, it will require a big sacrifice and it may just take one individual to stand up and say, right, well, I tell you what, I've played X number of minutes, I've traveled X number of miles over so many countries and continents, I'm not prepared to do it anymore. But who does that? I just hear a lot of hot air.
I think for me, I'm throwing this to Raj, what I look at is maybe the instance of the European Super League, that's the clubs having too much power. And I think, again, kind of looking at the clubs during the COVID crisis, the smaller clubs of the Premier League almost held the bigger clubs to ransom. They were the ones that said, we don't want more players in games. We don't want more substitutions because that gives an unfair advantage to the bigger teams. So my kind of thoughts and feelings, I don't know if you disagree with this, is actually it's kind of the clubs who are then linked to the league have the most power of all in these situations. You know, they can decide to make their own European Super League and not be punished. And then they can kind of decide the rules on these players, even though it would have been for the benefit. And also, statistically speaking as well, it actually benefited smaller clubs to have rotation of their players. I mean, would you agree with that then, Raj?
Yeah, so I kind of agree with both. In theory, I agree with Ben. The players do have the power if they're willing to apply it. However, if you have power and you don't apply it, you actually have power, right? And that takes a different step, like Ben is saying, a player or players to actually apply it. In the current status quo with how players kind of treat their role within the Premier League, the clubs have the power because the players aren't taking it for whatever reason. And so that's how I see it. I see it as ideal. I mean, in theory and in reality. In reality, to me, the clubs have it because they're the ones who are actually making the rules. The players could have it if they were willing to take those sacrifices. Have they? We know the answer to that.
So let's look at the science then. I mentioned some of the numbers there in terms of the COVID crisis, but let's look at why fatigue, especially at this time of year, is such an important talking point. Ben, let's start it off with you. You know, we're Premier Injuries here. We have all the data to kind of back up the statements that these managers and players are talking about. So kind of give us an inclination as to why this is the topic, the vogue one during December and January.
Yeah, I mean, the big ones is in the headline grabbers are just the sheer enormity of the number of reported injuries that we process. Typically, month on month, leading up to December, we see a 50% increase in December, and that can maybe continue into January as well. Hopefully, with the winter break this year, that may not happen. But what we tend to overlook, or maybe some people don't consider, we see a greater number of games in December. So, greater exposure, the higher probability that we will pick up injuries. And it's the type of injuries that we tend to see. We see a lot of soft tissue. We see a lot of hamstring problems. So those types of injuries that are that you would initially, associate with maybe fatigue, and the injuries that you're picking up, the not necessarily the knocks, but those little niggles, those strains, those we've seen it with Jamal Lewis, Sarmiento. I mean, we've seen an abundance of hamstring problems at the minute, maybe 10 or 12, even just over the last 7 days. So it's those types of injuries that are synonymous with, this particular month because of those quick turnarounds that, managers and coaches and players, just aren't happy about. And that's the main basis of their complaints.
Now, one of the big things that kind of goes around social media at this time is it's only 90 minutes of football. They're getting in luxury coaches there. They're living the high life and they're so looked after. They're massaged after the game. They've got all these amazing doctors at their disposal. Why is it such a big problem, Raj? Like, looking at the biomechanical science, why is a few games a week so bad to players' fatigue and their long-term kind of playing capacity?
I mean, high-level football is very tiring. And that's the gist of it. It puts a massive demand on your body. Even, playing a half or whatever it is puts a massive demand on your muscles. And I use the analogy a lot, and Ben, I think, referenced it last week. It's where if your muscle is like a bucket, it has a certain capacity to store water, right? A certain capacity for load. Once that you overload it, it then overflows, then it can become, you're leading to potential injury risk. So yes, players are trained in a certain way. That doesn't mean you have infinite amount of ability to go out and just constantly run around at high demands, right? So you have to give yourself time, a sufficient time to be able to empty out that bucket so that you can add in more water. And that's the problem when you have these games that are in very quick succession, is that you're not getting enough recovery time in to be able to do that. And another thing, I think Ben talked about this either last week or the week before, is that, whether it's managers, whoever it is, some of the training techniques have been just to let players rest rather than actually try to train them for some of these games at higher intensities between games and build up, increase the size of that bucket, right? So we're seeing a little bit of a paradigm shift toward that as well, but that takes time to do that. And so it's just a mismatch. The intensity of these games and the physical demand of these games is so high, especially in the Premier League. And we've talked about the intensity and the frequency of the bursts and sprints required of the Premier League being higher than any other league by a significant margin. So it just becomes very, very hard to give a player the requisite fitness to be able to handle those demands. And the players you do see it in, like those Iron Man players, Declan Rice, Granit Xhaka was up there for a while, other players, those guys, typically, they're the ones who have been playing in games consistently. So those games kind of almost become like fitness tests for them. However, when you have players who are going through some of these injury issues and they come back, you're adding another layer of injury risk, and now they have to adapt on the fly.
Just kind of looking at the average mileage of footballers in the Premier League, they cover about 10 to 11 kilometers per game, which if you kind of divide that down, it's about 7 kilometers per hour. When you kind of look at it that way, it doesn't seem too much. So Raj, is it these short bursts of high intensity runs? Is that what the killer is?
Yeah, high intensity bursts in the end, is the hardest thing. And so, and also, and it's not just straight line sprinting. You're talking about change of direction. You're talking about jumping. All these different things take a different, put different demands on your body and put a different level of fatigue on your body as well. And we haven't even considered the mental side of it. You're talking about guys who have to be switched on for the entire time that they're in the game. So that's going to lead to that mental burnout, and lead to nervous system burnout and fatigue as well. And so all these things are in combination leading to some of these injury issues.
Ben, let's talk about the post-game or between game kind of things that are done, though. Do you believe that something more needs to be done, or is there enough being done as much as possible with these players? What is the kind of typical procedure after a match?
Ordinarily, because in these COVID sort of ridden times, post-match recovery, pre-match build-up strategies, they're all changing at the moment. They're limited in terms of how much time players can spend with therapists, with physios, with masseurs. They're limited in terms of, can they even go indoors? A lot of clubs now are reducing any involvement, group gatherings indoors. Sessions are minimized or are booked on time slots. So, maybe they're not being able to have that adequate amount of pre and post match, build up and wind down. And maybe a lot of emphasis now is on the players. What we've seen after training sessions, and we just heard from Ralph Hasenhüttl today, Thursday, about, so now there is no hanging around after training, after the match. You go into your car, you change into your clothes, and you drive home. Now, for some of these players, they may live in a close proximity to grounds, to training, but if you're playing away, or and these little sort of things can exacerbate these problems. And it's just, the current climate isn't very conducive to optimum levels of recovery. Now, I have spoken to staff involved at the game where they've spoken about, look, this is down to the individual, however you want to manage your post-match recovery. Some of them was, we don't want you in the training ground the next day. We don't want to do any post-match recovery sessions. You just go and relax and do whatever you want, where other managers and other coaches, prefer to have players in the grounds. It's difficult. And I do. And I just want to touch upon a point that you mentioned before. It is those high intensity sprints, because inherently humans, the hunter-gatherer, we are evolved to hunt over long distances at a steady pace, to go mile upon mile upon mile at a constant rhythm. When you're playing in the Premier League, which is arguably the fastest and most explosive in the world, we're talking about where increased number of high intensity sprints with little or no rest between those. And this game is getting faster and faster and faster year on year. I think, the recent studies have suggested that the game now is around about, I think it's about a meter per second quicker than it was 20 years ago. And it's rising by about 5 to 7%. By the end of 2030, the game will be around about 7% faster. We're seeing more passes within a per minute slot, and we're seeing a higher number of sprints and intensity. And again, and I don't know if I've touched upon this before, but this comes down as well to the clubs and recruitment. And what we're seeing is, although the game is evolving, players aren't necessarily, and clubs now are recruiting players to be able to cope with the demands of that. But existing players within the game, they're struggling because they're not getting the opportunity to adapt and build. And that's why these players are breaking down.
A question maybe to both of you is looking at players' dedication. I'm not questioning any player's dedication here, but quite often I want to look at one of the greatest of all time, Cristiano Ronaldo. People talk about how even after games, he then goes to train. He does about 3 or 4 hours every day, 5 days a week, and his incredible dedication to his diet. He lives for football, basically. So with him, is he kind of an example of somebody who basically has got the best out of a football playing career? If every player kind of lived like him, breathed like him, ate like him, trained like him, they could have that kind of same level of fitness? Or is that not a fair comment to kind of say, and that it's each down to every individual, it's down to luck, genetics, whatever? I mean, Raj, what is your kind of thoughts on that one?
I mean, if we're talking about, you can't control for genetics and those things of nature, right? But when it comes to controlling the factors you can control, he has optimized those 100%. And so, I mean, even Messi has done so as well. Those top two, any of those top guys who've been there for a long time, have optimized all those other factors that they can control to give them that longevity. And the reality is, with players like any other profession, like humans in general, some are going to be extremely committed. Those will tend to be the outliers. It's going to be that normal bell curve. Most of them are going to be committed, and there are some who are not committed, right? The problem now becomes is, like Ben was saying, when you don't have clubs organizing these things for certain players, there's a natural tendency to fall off, especially for players who have been with, in youth academies. Everything is structured for you your whole life. You're doing this. So you get taught, you learn, that's how you're used to things being structured. You're not on your own very much. And now you have certain players who are used to that. Now they're on their own accord. So there's that mismatch now of players who are typically just taught how to do things regimented, and now that regiment's not there for them. And that can lead to some difficulties when it comes to, discipline training, discipline nutrition, et cetera, et cetera.
Is a lack of discipline at all linked to fatigue though, Ben, or is that kind of an unfair assumption to make for a lot of these players? I mean, do we even know enough about them to kind of make that comment?
I mean, in short, no. And I dare say maybe even some of the clubs don't fully understand and appreciate, what goes on behind closed doors. You have a very small window of opportunity to work with a player, what they do away from that club, maybe ask Phil Foden and Jack Grealish and Pep Guardiola, what they get up to. What I would say now and how the game has moved forward, long gone are the days where it's just football, what you play the weekend. This is a lifestyle decision. We know that now at the end of a season, there is no such thing as an off period where you can just go away and relax and party and enjoy yourself. They have off-season conditioning plans. Clubs have a level of expectation that you must come in at a certain weight with a certain level of fitness. So in order for you can maybe circumvent some of those initial sessions to focus on the things that really matter in the game in terms of tactics and technical side of the game. So look, fitness, fatigue, yes, closely related. And as Raj quite rightly said, there are going to be players who adhere to that and in a stricter fashion. The Ronaldos, the Messis of this world, that doesn't happen, not always by chance. That is dedication. And then you're going to have players who maybe choose not to dedicate as much of their life towards ensuring that, the longevity of their career.
One final question to both of you. Is it true that most footballers are carrying an injury basically all the time, and that quite often they've got, as Ben would say, knocks and niggles through the season, and it's kind of exacerbated during this December time? I mean, Raj, is that a truism, or is it a bit of a myth banded around the football community?
Injury to me it's a heavy word. There's a difference to me between having discomfort and having an overt injury. When it comes to having discomfort and soreness and things of that nature, absolutely, you're just putting your body through a lot, so you're going to have some of those things. Now, are they carrying an overt injury? No. I mean, I don't. That again, it just depends on what your definition of an injury is. To me, an injury is different than carrying discomfort and soreness. But that's why it's so important for me to teach footballers or anyone the difference between anticipated discomfort and soreness and when that might be leading to an overt injury, right? It's a big spectrum of gray.
Ben, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, when we talk about injury, I'm thinking time loss. I'm not thinking about, those ones that we can manage in between games. Good examples, you might think maybe Calvin Phillips, dislocated shoulder towards the end of last season, played through the Euros, managing that on the understanding that, he's going to need surgery at some point. Yes, it causes him a bit of discomfort, a little bit of pain, but can he go out there and still play, fairly close to optimal levels? Of course he can. Marcus Rashford, ongoing toe problem last season. Is it an injury? It's something you're aware of, but look, I don't think any player would hold their hands up and say, I feel 100% fit, particularly, when we're talking halfway through the season, when the games are coming thick and fast. That's part and parcel of the job. I mean, that's part and parcel of life. Jesus Christ, I feel like I'm about 95-year-old when I get up in the mornings. Do I consider myself injured? No, just old and fat.
Raj, do you share any of those sentiments?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say he's old and fat too. So I agree.
Merry Christmas, Raj.
Yeah. Happy holidays.
This is not only the last one of 2021. This is the last injuries podcast ever. We're going out here with a big one there. No, but I think this has been a really interesting podcast. And like I said, for everybody, please do subscribe, do comment below, ask us questions, because obviously fatigue is not an issue that goes away at this time of year. We're not going to get to February and magically everybody doesn't have fatigue anymore. It's a continuous issue. So if you have more questions, if you have more data requests as well, please do message us. But for now, that is the end of our big fatigue analysis and just giving you an insight into all the discussion points. But for now, I'm going to wish you the best of luck, the best of health, and have a very Merry Christmas, and we will see you in the new year.